Snow was still falling heavily when 16-year-old Emily Hartman vanished from her quiet Anchorage neighborhood. On the night of December 20th, 2013, a brutal blizzard swept through Alaska's largest city, temperatures plunging to minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Families stayed inside to escape the storm, but for Emily, the evening began with joy. She had just finished singing at her high school's Christmas concert, her bright smile and holiday excitement captured in the memories of friends who watched her leave. Around 8:45 p.m., she texted her parents two simple words: "I'm home." It was the last time anyone heard from her. When her father returned less than an hour later, the scene was strangely normal, her shoes neatly by the door, her heavy coat hanging on the chair, her red wool scarf still damp from melting snow. But Emily herself was gone. The house was silent, the kind of silence that makes your stomach twist. Outside, police flashlights soon revealed something chilling. Fresh footprints, large, long striding, nothing like Emily's, circled the living room window before vanishing into the night. It was as if someone had been watching, waiting, and then struck in the narrow window of time between Emily's text and her father's return. Imagine walking into your house and realizing your child is gone, leaving only silence behind. That was the Hartman family's reality, and it was just the beginning of a nightmare. What began that night would become one of Alaska's most haunting cold case files, a story of a teenage girl who vanished from the safety of her own home, and a community that searched through snow and darkness for answers. Before we dive deeper into this chilling case, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, because we bring you the true stories of lives cut short, mysteries unsolved, and justice delayed. The night had begun with laughter, music, and the warmth of a Christmas concert. Inside Anchorage High School's auditorium, parents clapped and cheered as students sang carols, their voices rising above the howl of the storm outside. Among them was 16-year-old Emily Hartman. Friends later recalled how she looked radiant on stage, her brown hair catching the soft light, her eyes alive with excitement. For Emily, the holiday season was her favorite time of year. When the concert ended, families bundled into coats, bracing against the biting wind as they filed out of the building. Emily left with her best friend, Deanna Ross, and Deanna's father, Russell, who had promised to give her a ride home. It was far too cold and dangerous for a teenage girl to walk alone in a storm like this. Their old sedan crawled down the snowy roads, headlights cutting a weak glow through the swirling white. Inside the car, the three chatted about the performance, exchanging jokes about who had sung off-key, laughing at plans for Christmas morning. Emily was her usual self, upbeat, thus smiling, hopeful. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. At around 8:40 p.m., the car pulled up to the Hartman family's modest home, a small single-story house with a frosted porch light. Emily thanked the Rosses, wrapped her red wool scarf around her neck, and stepped into the deep snow. She turned, waving to wish them a happy holiday, her boots crunching against the frozen ground. Deanna would later testify that Emily seemed completely fine, calm, cheerful, and in a hurry to get inside. Emily walked up the path, flicking the porch light on and off several times, the family's silent signal that she had made it home safely. It was something her parents had taught her years before, a quick reassurance before they received the confirming text. Just minutes later, at 8:45 p.m., her parents' phone buzzed with her final message. "I'm home." Eights. But in reality, that was the last moment of certainty. From that point on, Emily's trail vanished as if swallowed by the storm. Her father had been out running errands in the storm and returned at 9:30 p.m., less than an hour after Emily had texted. As he entered the house, He noticed the details immediately. Emily's shoes were neatly by the door. Her heavy winter coat was draped over a chair. On the sofa sat her familiar dark green backpack, the zipper slightly open to reveal schoolbooks and a pencil case. Her red scarf, damp from melted snow, was tossed over the armrest. Her phone was resting on the coffee table, fully charged, the screen dark. Everything suggested she had walked in, settled down, and begun to relax. But the room was unnervingly quiet. Emily wasn't in the kitchen. She wasn't upstairs in her room. She wasn't anywhere. Her father called her name, first softly, then louder, racing from room to room, searching closets, bathrooms, even the garage. The silence grew heavier with each unanswered call. Within minutes, panic replaced confusion. He knew his daughter, knew her routines. Emily would never leave without her phone, never step outside without telling someone, especially not in sub-zero conditions. If you were Emily's parent, how would you explain shoes by the door but no daughter in sight? His hands trembling, Emily's father dialed 911. His voice cracked as he told dispatchers his daughter was missing. Within minutes, red and blue lights cut through the snowstorm, Anchorage police cruisers pulling up in front of the house. Neighbors peeked from behind frosted windows, their street suddenly transformed into a scene of dread. At exactly 10:00 p.m., two officers stepped out of their cruiser. Their boots crunched into the deep snow, breath forming heavy clouds in the frigid air. Emily's father met them at the door, his eyes red, his voice choking as he said, "She's gone. I've looked everywhere." Eights. Inside, officers moved quickly but carefully, flashlights sweeping across the tidy living room. They noticed how undisturbed everything appeared. No overturned furniture, no broken glass, no sign of a struggle. The locks on the doors and windows were intact. It was as though Emily had simply evaporated from the warm glow of her home. But one detail stood out immediately. Her phone left on the table. For a modern teenager, especially one as connected as Emily, abandoning a phone was unthinkable. To the police, it suggested something sinister, that she had been interrupted, taken before she could react. Officers moved to secure the perimeter. One swept his flashlight across the snow by the living room window, stopping abruptly. There, etched clearly into the fresh powder, was a set of footprints. Large, wide, each stride far longer than Emily's. The prints circled the window, pausing as if the person had stood there, watching through the glass, waiting for the perfect moment. The tracks then disappeared into the dark street beyond. The sight made the air heavier inside the house. Emily's father clutched his head, muttering through clenched teeth. She wouldn't just go. She wouldn't. His words echoed what everyone in the room felt. This was no runaway, no impulsive act. It was the sign of someone else, someone who had come for her. By 10:30 p.m., the duty officer had made a quiet but firm decision. This scene needed to be treated as an abduction. Forensics were called in. They marked the footprints with reflective stakes, prepared plaster casts to preserve the impressions before the storm buried them. Inside, they bagged the red scarf, swabbed the sofa, collected a few long brown hairs. Every detail was photographed, every angle documented. Neighbors later told police they remembered hearing nothing, no screams, no cries for help. The storm outside had swallowed sound, masking whatever had happened in that brief window of time. That silence was perhaps the most chilling detail of all. By the time the first evidence bags were sealed, the Hartman family's nightmare had only deepened. Emily had made it home safely. She had stepped into the warmth, removed her scarf, set down her backpack, and texted her parents. Then, in less than 45 minutes, she was gone. The narrowness of that time frame haunted investigators. Whoever had taken her knew exactly when to strike, between her arrival and her father's return. It spoke to calculation, planning, and perhaps familiarity with her routine. For Emily's parents, the clock had stopped. Each second without answers felt like eternity. For the Anchorage police, the hunt was only just beginning. What do you think happened in those missing 45 minutes? Drop your theories in the comments below, because the smallest detail could hold the key to solving the mystery. The clock had barely struck 11. Year 0 p.m. when the Anchorage Police Department issued an emergency Amber Alert. Across Alaska's largest city, televisions interrupted programming, radios cut into music, and thousands of cell phones buzzed with the same urgent message. Missing child, 16-year-old Emily Hartman, last seen in her Anchorage home at 8:45 p.m. Possible abduction. Search underway. The message spread like wildfire. Neighbors stepped out onto porches despite the punishing storm, faces pale in the glow of flashing police lights. Within an hour, what had been a quiet residential street was transformed into the center of a frantic mobilization. Patrol cars moved in convoy through the snow-choked roads, red and blue lights painting the white drifts in eerie colors. Helicopters were dispatched, their powerful spotlights cutting through the blizzard as they swept over rooftops, wooded areas, and frozen creeks behind the Hartman neighborhood. On the ground, K9 units attempted to pick up Emily's scent from the shoes she had left by the door. But at -20 degrees Fahrenheit, the snow fell relentlessly, masking every trace, burying each footprint under fresh layers. Still, the search pressed forward. Officers in heavy parkas trudged through knee-deep snow, radios crackling with updates. They divided into teams, fanning out block by block, checking alleys, garages, and the dark tree line that bordered the neighborhood. Their flashlights bobbed in the swirling flakes like fireflies swallowed by the night. As word spread, the community began to arrive. By midnight, hundreds of volunteers had gathered, bundled in scarves, wool hats, and thick gloves. Some carried shovels to clear paths, others gripped flashlights with trembling hands. They formed lines across fields, calling Emily's name into the darkness. The sound of her name echoed, carried away by the howling wind, swallowed before it could reach anything human. If you held a flashlight that night, would you dare step deeper into that frozen silence? Many did. Entire families showed up to help, neighbors who had never spoken to the Hartmans trudging side by side with strangers, unified by one goal: bringing Emily home. Parents clutched their children tighter, fear creeping into their voices as they shouted her name. Some volunteers ventured into wooded trails despite the numbing cold, searching for any clue: a glove, a scrap of fabric, a footprint not yet erased. But the storm was merciless. Every few minutes, snow piled higher, masking the ground like a blank page. What had been clear footprints hours earlier were already gone, smoothed over by nature's unrelenting hand. The dogs whined, losing the trail again and again, their noses overwhelmed by the bitter cold. Helicopters circled for hours, but visibility dropped so low that pilots were forced to return to base. Inside the Hartman home, the emotional toll deepened with each passing minute. And Emily's mother, still in her hospital scrubs, sat trembling on the living room sofa. Her eyes were hollow, her hands clasped tightly as if in prayer. She kept repeating, "Where is my daughter?" She was already home. She was safe. No one could answer? Officers moved quietly around her, bagging evidence, snapping photographs, their professional composure a thin veil over the heavy weight in the air. Emily's father paced back and forth, glancing again and again at the door as though willing her to walk through it. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot from panic. Each time a radio squawked with an update, his head jerked up with desperate hope, only to sag again when the words carried no breakthrough. By 2:0 a.m. The search had expanded beyond the immediate neighborhood. Convoys of police cruisers moved toward gas stations, convenience stores, and parking lots within several miles, asking managers for security footage. Volunteers followed officers down frozen roads that led toward the highway, forming search parties in areas where snowdrifts towered higher than fences. Still, nothing. No glove, no scarf, no trace. The blizzard erased as fast as they searched, leaving the night eerily blank. At 3:0 a.m., K9 units returned, their handlers shaking their heads. The dogs had lost the scent completely. Exhausted volunteers were ordered to pause, some collapsing onto snowbanks, their breath forming clouds in the icy air. Tears froze on faces, eyes red from the sting of wind. Despite their exhaustion, many begged to continue. "We can't stop," one neighbor whispered. "She's out there." Eights. But the storm didn't care about human determination. Helicopters grounded, dogs silenced, volunteers sent home. By dawn, the only sound was the crunch of boots and the low murmur of radios. Anchorage awoke that morning to grim news. Emily Hartman was missing. The overnight search had failed, and the odds of survival in such temperatures were slim. Her photograph, smiling in a choir uniform, flashed across every local television screen. Posters were printed by the hundreds, taped to utility poles, nailed to church doors, and plastered inside coffee shops. For the community, shock turned to fear. If Emily could vanish from her own home in less than an hour, then no one was safe. Parents tightened curfews, children walked in groups, neighbors locked doors twice over. The sense of security that Anchorage's quiet neighborhoods once held was shattered in a single night. Back at the Hartman home, police had turned the small house into a command center. Maps were spread across tables, pins marking search grids. Radios crackled constantly as officers relayed reports. Forensic technicians continued their slow, meticulous work, bagging fibers, lifting fingerprints, labeling strands of hair. Each click of a camera shutter echoed the unspoken truth. So far, none of it was leading to Emily. By mid-morning, after nearly 12 hours of frantic searching, officers gathered to report to the lead investigator. Their words were heavy, their conclusions grim. No positive sightings, no recovered belongings, search inconclusive. Eights. The Hartman parents sat in silence as the summary was read. Emily's mother buried her face in her hands. Her father simply stared at the floor, jaw tight, fists clenched until his knuckles whitened. The storm outside had calmed slightly, but inside the house, the weight of despair only grew heavier. For Anchorage, that first night marked the beginning of years of unanswered questions. A girl had vanished from her own home in the heart of a city, in a neighborhood where everyone believed they were safe. The blizzard had not only erased her footprints, it had erased hope. And as the sun rose weakly over the snow-blanketed streets, the city began to realize this was not just a missing persons case. It was the beginning of a mystery that would haunt Alaska for nearly a decade. By sunrise on December 21st, Anchorage was a city on edge. The storm had settled, leaving behind a heavy silence broken only by the hum of patrol cars and the crunch of boots over snow. Emily Hartman's face was everywhere. On the morning news, on hastily printed posters, and in the minds of a community that could not believe a girl had vanished from her own home. Inside the Anchorage Police Department, detectives shifted focus from the failed overnight search to the first stage of any missing person investigation, interviewing those closest to Emily. Her father went first. He sat slumped in a chair, his coat still dusted with snow, eyes red from a sleepless night. Investigators asked him to recount every detail of the evening. What time he had left the house, what he saw when he returned, whether Emily had ever disappeared before. His voice cracked as he answered. No, she never ran off. She cared about school, about choir. She texted us every time she came home. She was dependable. Eights. Next came Emily's mother, still shaken from her night shift at the hospital. Her hands shook as she clasped them tightly, as if in prayer. The detectives pressed gently. Had Emily been under unusual stress? Had she ever mentioned wanting to escape, to leave Anchorage, to run away? Her mother shook her head firmly, tears brimming in her eyes. No, she was excited for Christmas. She bought gifts for her friends. She talked about decorating the tree. She wasn't sad. She wasn't planning to go anywhere. Eights. Emily's older sister, a college freshman, arrived home that morning and was brought into the room. Her testimony was just as unwavering. She recalled Emily's excitement for the concert, how she had chosen her outfit days in advance, how she had texted about exchanging Christmas gifts. Through tears, she said, "If something was wrong, she would have told me. We told each other everything." Eights. Detectives noted the pattern. No history of running away, no mental health struggles, no family conflicts severe enough to explain a disappearance. Attention turned to Emily's friends. One by one, her classmates were brought in, still wearing their choir outfits, voices trembling with fear. They described Emily as cheerful, the kind of friend who lifted everyone's spirits. One recalled how she texted the group earlier that day to remind them not to forget their Christmas gifts. None could recall a single sign that she wanted to disappear. Even Emily's ex-boyfriend was questioned, a 17-year-old who looked nervous as he sat across from detectives. He admitted they had broken up months earlier, but insisted they remained friendly at school. When asked about his whereabouts, he quickly offered alibis. 3 friends who were with him that evening, watching basketball. Detectives followed up, and by the end of the day, all 3 confirmed his story. The ex-boyfriend was cleared. Piece by piece, investigators eliminated the possibility of Emily leaving on her own or being harmed by someone in her immediate circle. The net widened outward. That same morning, tips flooded in through the police hotline. One stood out immediately. A taxi driver claimed he had seen a girl who looked like Emily near the Anchorage Mall around 9:45 p.m., just an hour after her last text. She was standing outside in a light-colored sweater, long brown hair catching the dim glow of the parking lot lights, looking uncertain as though waiting for someone. For a family grasping at hope, the report was electric. If true, it meant Emily had left the house willingly or had been lured, but was still alive and in public. Detectives rushed to the mall, pulling security footage from entrances and parking lot cameras. Hours of grainy video were combed through until, at last, they found her. A young woman with long hair, a pale sweater, passing under a camera at 9:43 p.m. The room fell silent. Was this the break they needed? But zooming in crushed that fragile hope. The girl was older, a known local shopper whose identity was quickly confirmed. The taxi driver hadn't lied, but in dim light and driving snow, he had simply mistaken a familiar figure. When detectives told the Hartman family the news, Emily's mother collapsed, clutching her chest as if struck. She had clung to the belief that her daughter had been seen alive. Now that hope evaporated, leaving only a deeper ache. The false lead cost precious hours. But worse, it shook the family's fragile faith in the search. Each mistake felt like betrayal, another layer of suffering piled onto already broken hearts. Meanwhile, forensic teams pressed on. They worked late into the night, analyzing every scrap of evidence collected from the Hartman home. The long brown hairs from the sofa were carefully packaged and prepared for DNA extraction. The red scarf was swabbed for biological material. Fingerprints from the coffee table and window frame were lifted, compared against state and national databases. But 2013 technology had limits. The hairs produced only faint, degraded DNA fragments, too small to build a full profile. When entered into CODIS, the National DNA Database, the result was stark. No match. The fingerprints were equally disappointing. They were partial, smudged, lacking the clarity needed to match against millions of records. Analysts tried again and again, but the results never changed. Inconclusive. The red scarf revealed only fibers consistent with common winter clothing, nothing unique, nothing to trace. The final forensic report was short and devastating. No usable DNA, no CODIS hits, no fingerprint matches. When detectives read the report aloud in the command center, the air turned heavy. Emily's father sat stone-faced, his hands clenched until his knuckles turned white. Her mother broke down, sobbing in a corner. Forensic silence felt like a death sentence. No science to guide them, no evidence to follow, only shadows and speculation. By early January 2014, the case was beginning to stall. Leads ran dry. Witness accounts blurred into contradictions. Each day without progress stretched the distance between Emily's last text and the present, a widening chasm that threatened to swallow the case whole. In meetings, investigators debated next steps. Some argued they should double down on neighborhood canvassing, others that they should broaden the radius to highways and remote cabins. But all shared the same gnawing fear. The critical window had already passed. The Hartman family lived in torment. Emily's shoes remained by the door, her room untouched, the Christmas decorations she had hung still glowing faintly. Neighbors left casseroles and candles on the porch, unsure of what else to do. At the local church, prayers were said nightly, the community clinging to hope that Emily would somehow return. But inside the police department, confidence was slipping. For every false lead chased, resources drained. For every forensic test that failed, despair deepened. Detectives began to whisper what no one wanted to admit, that Emily Hartman's disappearance might soon be classified as unsolved. And yet, even as the case faltered, one thing was certain. The Hartman family would not let their daughter's story fade. If you're still with us, stay tuned, because what comes next will change everything. The winter of 2014 in Anchorage quickly turned into a season of frustration. In mid-January, a man walked into the Anchorage Police Department, shivering, unshaven, and desperate. He claimed responsibility for Emily Hartman's disappearance. Detectives immediately cleared a room, their pulses racing with the thought that, finally, the case might have cracked open. The man said he had followed Emily from the school concert, slipped into her home, and taken her into the woods. He described a remote cabin south of Anchorage, insisting that was where she had been hidden. For a moment, hope electrified the room. Could this be the breakthrough that would finally bring Emily back? Officers were dispatched, snowmobiles roaring into the forest to search for the cabin he described. What they found was nothing more than a decayed wooden shack, abandoned for years, the roof caved in, dust and snow blanketing the inside. No trace of Emily. When pressed on details, his story wavered. He insisted she wore a green coat that night, even though every witness knew Emily had left her coat at home. Piece by piece, the lies unraveled. After 3 exhausting days of questioning, detectives realized the grim truth. The man had fabricated everything. He admitted he simply wanted a warm bed, hot meals, and a place to stay during the brutal Alaskan winter. His false confession not only wasted precious time, but also tore open fresh wounds for the Hartman family. Emily's mother clutched the table when told the confession was false, whispering, "So we're back to nothing?" For her, every promise of closure seemed to dissolve into the snow. But that was only the beginning. In the following weeks, Anchorage police were flooded with tips. Call after call poured into the hotline. Some claimed to have seen a teenage girl running through alleys near Wasilla. Others swore they spotted Emily in a convenience store up north. Volunteers and officers alike were dispatched to every lead. They reviewed grainy camera footage from gas stations, checked store logs, and interviewed strangers who insisted they had seen a girl who looked just like her. 8s. Every time, the result was the same. Mistaken identity. A girl with a similar hairstyle. A fleeting figure in bad lighting. A stranger bundled in a winter coat. Each sighting ended in disappointment. And for the Hartman family, every false alarm carried a cruel rhythm. Hope surging, hearts pounding, bags packed to rush toward the lead, only to have the truth collapse hours later with a cold call from police. Emily's mother would later admit, "Each time I died a little more." 8s. By March 2014, the case was fraying. Investigators knew that time was the enemy. Every day without evidence made it less likely Emily would be found alive. Internally, some officers admitted they were chasing ghosts, squandering resources on rumors instead of focusing on the original crime scene. Community patience was wearing thin too. Local media began to write biting articles, calling Emily's disappearance a test of Anchorage's faith in its own police force. Neighbors who once gathered with flashlights grew quieter, their optimism eroded by weeks of fruitless searching. Yet amid the despair, a new figure emerged in the community narrative. His name was Robert Kane. A middle-aged Army veteran who had served overseas, Caney lived only 2 miles from the Hartman family. To most, he seemed like a quiet, respectable neighbor. But in those weeks after Emily's disappearance, he began appearing at every vigil, every prayer service, every community gathering. He often sat near the front, his face solemn, his hands folded, sometimes offering to speak. At first, his words sounded compassionate. "I'm a father too. I understand your pain." But over time, some listeners noticed something unnerving. He seemed unusually invested, sometimes offering theories about what happened to Emily. In one interview with a local reporter, he commented, "If a girl got home at 8:45 but vanished before 9:30, then the stalker surely knew her schedule." 8s. Those words made detectives pause when they later reviewed the footage. How did Robert know the exact window of time Emily disappeared? That precise detail had never been released to the public. It was only contained in police reports and family statements. While nothing he said directly implicated him, the subtle slip planted the first seeds of suspicion. Neighbors also remembered odd encounters. Some recalled seeing Robert near the high school in the weeks before Emily's disappearance, lingering by the fence, claiming he liked evening walks but often stopping to watch students leaving. Others noted he drove an old blue pickup truck, sometimes spotted idling on the streets around the neighborhood. In early 2014, however, none of this added up to proof. Police had no hard evidence tying Robert to the crime. His words were strange, yes, but in the chaos of false leads, his presence was drowned out by louder rumors. For the Hartman family, he was just another neighbor offering condolences. For detectives, he was placed on a long list of persons of interest, noted but not pursued. Looking back, this was the moment when Robert Kane first slipped into the story. A man who blended into vigils and prayers, whose voice mingled with the grieving community, yet who would later emerge as the center of suspicion. But in 2014, his image remained blurred, hidden behind the noise of false confessions and empty sightings. For the Hartmans, the emotional toll was relentless. They attended vigils, hoping for a miracle, only to return home to Emily's empty room. Her shoes still sat by the door, her scarf folded on the sofa, as if waiting for her return. The father grew quieter by the day, pacing the living room as though expecting Emily to walk through the door at any moment. The mother swung between desperate hope and crushing despair, praying each night but bracing for more disappointment. By the end of March, 3 months after Emily's disappearance, the investigation had stalled. Forensics had yielded nothing, witnesses had run dry, and leads collapsed one by one. The storm of hope and heartbreak had left the community drained. And yet, beneath the silence of Anchorage's snowy streets, a darker truth lingered. Someone out there knew what happened that night. And the quiet figure sitting at the vigils, Robert Kane, would one day return to the forefront of this haunting mystery. We'll soon draw viewers deeper. If you're still with us, stay tuned. What comes next will change everything. By late March 2014, hope in Anchorage had thinned like the melting snow. 3 long months had passed since Emily Hartman vanished on that bitter December night, and the investigation had yielded little beyond dead ends and false alarms. The police, once mobilized in force with helicopters, K-9s, and community volunteers, now faced a grim reality. Forensics had given them nothing. Witnesses had no new information, and the storm of false tips had drained manpower and morale. On a gray morning in March, the Anchorage Police Department called a press conference. Cameras were set up, reporters filled the small media room, and the Hartman family sat in the front row, their faces pale, their bodies trembling with dread of what they were about to hear. The spokesperson stepped to the podium, the weight of failure heavy in his voice. He read from a short, carefully worded statement. 8. We have pursued every available lead in the disappearance of 16-year-old Emily Hartman. Despite exhaustive efforts, door-to-door canvassing, interviews, forensic testing, and statewide alerts, we currently have no viable investigative path forward. Effective today, Emily Hartman's disappearance will be classified as a cold case. 8. Those words landed like a blade in the hearts of the Hartman family. Emily's mother broke down instantly, sobbing into her hands as cameras clicked around her. Her father sat in silence, his jaw locked, eyes staring forward at nothing. Her older sister turned away, unable to watch. To them, cold case didn't just mean investigative status. It meant surrender. It meant their daughter's laughter, her future, her very existence, was now just a file number in a drawer. By 2014, Emily's disappearance was shelved among Alaska's growing stack of cold case files. The press left. Headlines captured the phrase, "Case declared cold," and the neighborhood grew quieter. The posters with Emily's smiling face that once decorated light poles and shop windows began to fade and peel, battered by the wind. What had once been a citywide mobilization dwindled into silence. Yet the Hartman family refused to let that silence win. In December of that same year, on the anniversary of her disappearance, they held a vigil at the small church Emily once sang in with her choir. Friends, neighbors, classmates, and even strangers gathered in the candlelight, singing Christmas hymns she had loved. And every year afterward, the tradition continued. Even as the crowd grew smaller, the Hartmans lit candles and prayed, reminding the world that Emily was more than a line in a report. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend. For them, the word cold was not the end. It was the beginning of a new kind of fight, a fight to keep Emily's name alive. 2 years later, in 2016, hope flickered faintly once again, though it was hope the family never knew about at the time. In a quiet office of the Anchorage Police Department's Unsolved Cases Unit, a young investigator was assigned to review dormant files. Among the dozens of brown cardboard boxes stacked on metal shelves, one caught his eye. Its label read, Hartman, Emily, December 2013. Eights. He carried it to a desk, peeled back the brittle tape, and opened a vault of sorrow. Inside lay the artifacts of a vanished girl. Her dark green coat sealed in a preservation bag, envelopes containing strands of her brown hair, the plaster casts of footprints taken outside the Hartman home. The investigator laid them out carefully on the table, aware that he was touching not just evidence, but the last fragments of a life stolen in silence. He examined each piece, documenting in meticulous notes. He spread the coat flat, brushing gloved fingers along the collar. He lifted the hair samples to the light, studying the delicate strands. He turned the plaster footprints in his hands, noting their size, their depth, the unmistakable shape of an adult male's stride. But for all his care, he knew the limits of the moment. In 2016, Alaska's forensic labs still lacked the advanced DNA technology that could pull results from degraded samples. Next-generation sequencing, the tool that could decode even the smallest fragments of genetic material, was not yet available to him. What he held was potential, but potential locked away by the boundaries of science and budget. In his report, he recommended the evidence be preserved for future testing, should technology improve. He logged his findings, signed his name, and returned the box to the cabinet. And with a quiet push of metal sliding against metal, the file slipped back into the shadows. The Hartman family never knew of this moment. They continued their vigils, continued their pleas, continued to live in the emptiness Emily had left behind. For them, 2016 was another year of silence. They had no idea that, behind closed doors, their daughter's evidence had been touched again, briefly brought into the light, then stored away once more. The truth was simple, cruel, and heavy. The case remained inactive. The hope was still faint. The ice of Alaska's winters remained unbroken around the truth. And yet, the story was not over. The vigil candles still burned each December. The Hartmans still whispered Emily's name in prayer. And in a file cabinet in Anchorage, sealed in plastic and paper, her coat, her hair, and the footprints outside her window still waited, waiting for the day when science would catch up and silence could finally be broken. Would you keep fighting if your child's case was marked cold? Comment below. By the fall of 2016, nearly 3 years after Emily vanished, the Hartman family decided they could not remain silent. Anchorage had moved on, as small communities often do when cases grow cold, but inside the Hartman home, the pain was as raw as the night Emily disappeared. Every December, the candles at the vigil glowed, but the family knew they needed more than prayers. They needed action. Emily's father took the lead. Tired, grief-stricken, but fueled by stubborn determination, he began researching how other states had formed special cold case units. He read about Colorado's dedicated task forces, about Oregon's forensic genealogy breakthroughs, about New York's reinvestigations that had solved decades-old mysteries. He began drafting a petition to Alaska's state government, asking them to establish an independent cold case unit. His petition read, 8. If our daughter is forgotten, How many other families will face the same fate? A dedicated unit is not just for Emily's justice, but for the hundreds of other families across Alaska who deserve answers. 8. The petition gained quiet traction. Local churches signed on. Small businesses taped flyers to their windows. Parents at Emily's high school reunion handed out petitions at football games. For the Hartmans, it was a way to keep her name alive, to make sure that even if the police had closed her file, the community would not. In 2017, the Anchorage Daily News took notice. A team of investigative reporters began a multi-part series titled Emily of Anchorage. The series revisited the timeline of her disappearance, the footprints in the snow, the unanswered questions, and the trail of false leads that had consumed police resources. The reporters interviewed neighbors, classmates, and even revisited the church where vigils continued each December. One article carried a haunting line. There are faces we see daily in our community, but we never truly know who they are. 8. The series humanized Emily again, not just as a missing person, but as a daughter who had sung Christmas hymns, who had dreams of studying music in college, who had a room still decorated with holiday lights waiting for her return. It was also unflinching in its criticism of the Anchorage Police Department's failures. Headlines questioned whether the case had been mishandled, whether false leads had distracted investigators, and whether the lack of forensic funding had doomed Emily's file to dust. For the Hartman family, the series was bittersweet. On one hand, it returned Emily's face to the front page and kept her story alive. On the other, it reopened wounds, forcing them to relive the worst days of their lives in print. Still, they recognized its value. As Emily's mother said in one interview, "Silence buries the truth. Speaking her name keeps her alive." 8. And always, at the vigils, one man continued to appear. Robert Kane, the veteran, who lived just 2 miles away, never missed a prayer gathering. He was often seen in the front pew, candles flickering across his expressionless face. Sometimes he would speak, offering words that unsettled more than comforted. "I think whoever took Emily knew her routine," he once said. "Knew when she got home, when she was alone. That's how it happened so quickly." 8. Those words echoed the original timeline police had quietly kept out of public view. How did Robert know? The reporters noted his presence, even capturing photographs of him at vigils, his hands clasped, his gaze fixed not on the candles, but on the Hartman family themselves. For detectives still unofficially watching him, Robert's appearances raised more questions than answers. He insisted he was there out of empathy, claiming, "I'm a father, too." But others found his demeanor unnerving. Neighbors remembered him lurking near the high school in years past. Now, his calm but oddly precise remarks about Emily's disappearance only fueled unease. The Hartmans tried to ignore him, focusing instead on the candles and the hymns. Yet, each December, as Robert stood among them, they couldn't shake the feeling that the man who claimed to share their grief might be watching their suffering with different eyes. By 2018, the petition had gathered thousands of signatures but stalled in bureaucratic red tape. The state acknowledged the need but cited budget shortfalls and competing priorities. For the family, it was another wall, another way the system seemed determined to let Emily's case fade. But they pressed on. They gave interviews. They stood outside courthouses with signs. They reminded everyone who would listen that Emily was not just a statistic. As her father said in one televised statement, "The Hartmans refused to let Emily's cold case files gather dust." Through it all, Anchorage felt the tension. The Emily of Anchorage series had stirred the public debate. Some saw it as necessary pressure on a complacent system. Others accused the press of exploiting tragedy. But for Emily's family, it was life or death, not for Emily herself, but for the pursuit of her truth. By 2020, 7 long years had passed. The vigils had grown smaller, the posters faded, the petition unanswered. Yet the Hartmans remained. Each candle they lit was a protest, each hymn a demand that the truth would not be buried under Alaskan snow forever. And still, in the back pews of the church or at the edge of the crowd, Robert Caney remained. His presence was a shadow, a reminder that the case was not simply a mystery, but a wound left open, bleeding suspicion into every whispered prayer. The world might have tried to move on, but the Hartman family never did. They were the guardians of Emily's memory, the keepers of her flame, and their relentless pressure would one day collide with the advance of science and with the man who had haunted them all along. By 2021, nearly a decade had passed since Emily Hartman vanished, and for years her case had sat dormant in the archives, waiting for something, anything that could pierce the silence. That year, something remarkable happened. The state of Alaska received federal funding to expand its forensic capabilities, specifically to implement next-generation sequencing and genetic genealogy, techniques that had already solved high-profile cases in states like California, Oregon, and Washington. For the Hartman family, it was the first time in years they felt real hope. They had petitioned, they had prayed, and they had kept Emily's name alive through vigils and newspaper articles. Now, at last, science had caught up to their grief. The Anchorage Police Department pulled Emily's evidence box from storage, the same box that had been opened in 2016 but closed again for lack of technology. Inside, carefully preserved, were a few strands of brown hair taken from the sofa, fibers from the carpet, and a crucial sample cut from the living room rug containing faint traces of blood. Technicians placed the samples under sterile lights in Alaska's upgraded forensic laboratory. Unlike in 2013, when the DNA had been too degraded and too small to analyze, the new sequencing machines could work with fragments, tiny strands broken down by time but still carrying their genetic code. The process was painstaking. Extraction, amplification, sequencing, and comparison against massive databases. Every step carried the weight of a decade of waiting. At first, the analysts didn't expect much. But then the data came back. Faint genetic markers, enough to be cross-referenced. They ran the results through GED Match and Family Tree DNA, databases where ordinary citizens submit their DNA to trace ancestry. This was the turning point. The computer screen lit up with several partial matches. Not parents, not siblings, but distant cousins scattered across Idaho and Montana. It wasn't a name, not yet, but it was a thread. For the first time in years, investigators had something that could be traced, mapped, and built into a tree that might one day point to a suspect. The lead investigator read the report slowly, his voice carrying the weight of what it meant. For the first time, Alaska's cold case files could speak again through DNA. Eights. In the Hartman home, when police delivered the update, Emily's mother wept into her hands. For years, she had asked only for a sign that her daughter's case had not been buried forever. Now, she finally heard those words. Emily's father sat quietly, nodding, his jaw tight, his eyes wet. He whispered, "We'll wait as long as it takes." Eights. The media seized the story instantly. Headlines declared, "Forensic genealogy could unlock Anchorage's darkest mystery." Local broadcasts replayed Emily's smiling choir photo, alongside footage of scientists in lab coats preparing vials of DNA. For a community once resigned to silence, this was a spark of light in the endless winter. But building a family tree from distant relatives is no easy task. It required months of careful analysis, combing through records, tracing family branches, and narrowing thousands of possible connections to a handful of names who could have been in Anchorage in 2013. Still, even the possibility lifted the case from despair. Detectives spoke with renewed purpose, saying this was not just about Emily, but about every unsolved disappearance in Alaska. If genealogy worked here, it could work again and again. The Hartman's petition, once ignored, now looked prophetic. Families across the state felt a surge of hope that their own missing loved ones might one day be found. For Emily's family, this moment was transformative. They had lived nearly a decade in limbo, watching candles burn lower each December, watching Emily's posters fade from telephone poles. Now, science had handed them something concrete, something that could not be erased by snow or silence. The father later told a local reporter, "This isn't closure, but it's a beginning. For the first time in years, we're moving forward, not backward." 8. The case that had once been filed away, marked inactive, was suddenly alive again. The strands of Emily's hair, the faint blood on the carpet, once dismissed as useless, had become the bridge to a future where truth might finally emerge. And as Anchorage waited, the community understood that justice was no longer frozen. The path was slow, fragile, and incomplete, but it existed. And sometimes, in a place as cold and dark as Alaska's winters, a single thread of hope is enough to ignite a storm. Share this video if you believe science can bring forgotten cases back into the light. The summer of 2022 was one of Alaska's brief, fragile warm seasons. Near Fairbanks, roughly 150 miles from Anchorage, construction crews worked on a pipeline project. On a July afternoon, an excavator operator noticed something unusual in the churned earth. What first appeared to be pale stone emerged as a curved shape. He climbed down, brushed the wet soil away, and froze. It wasn't rock. It was bone. Work halted instantly. Police were called, and forensic teams soon arrived, taping off the muddy site. As they carefully excavated the shallow pit, more bones emerged, small fragments at first, then the full outline of a skeleton. Beside it lay scraps of fabric, a tattered light-colored sweater and a dark gray skirt, the same outfit Emily Hartman had worn the night she disappeared. Faded shoes, their leather rotted but recognizable, rested nearby. After 9 years of silence, the earth itself had revealed the truth. The remains were rushed to Alaska's state forensic lab. DNA was extracted from bone marrow and compared to samples collected from Emily's parents in 2013. The result was undeniable. The skeleton was Emily Hartman. For the first time since that December night, there was no more uncertainty. Emily was gone. The Hartman family received the news in a small, heavy meeting room. Emily's mother collapsed at the table, sobbing uncontrollably, torn between relief and devastation. For years she had lived with the torture of not knowing, clinging to faint hope that maybe Emily was alive somewhere. Now, that hope was extinguished. Emily's father sat motionless, his hands clenched, his eyes fixed on the floor. After a long silence, he whispered only, "At least we can bring her home." 8. But the discovery carried an even darker revelation. As forensic experts examined the skull, they found a round, clean hole in the right temple, a bullet wound. Scans revealed the bullet was still lodged deep inside, preserved by the frozen soil. Gunpowder residue on the sweater confirmed what the bone already told. Emily had not simply vanished. She had been executed, a single gunshot fired at close range. This was no accident, no runaway, no abduction gone awry. This was homicide. Cold, deliberate, final. The community reeled as the news broke. Local broadcasts replaced missing with murdered. Candlelight vigils swelled once more, this time with hundreds gathering to mourn. Outside the small Anchorage church, Emily's photo was framed with flowers and flickering candles. Strangers whispered prayers in the cool summer air, their grief mingled with outrage. And for you, as a parent, the question becomes unbearable. If you were Emily's parent, would you rather not know or face the brutal truth of a single gunshot? The Hartmans now carried that truth, carved into their hearts forever. For investigators, the discovery was both devastating and galvanizing. The mystery was no longer whether Emily was alive. The truth was clear. She had been murdered the very night she came home from the concert. The case had shifted forever. It was now a homicide investigation, and the hunt for her killer was only beginning. With Emily's remains identified in 2022, the Anchorage Police Department shifted gears. What had been speculation for nearly a decade was now fact. Emily had been murdered, and the killer had hidden her body more than 150 miles away in Fairbanks. Investigators knew they needed to reconstruct the timeline with fresh eyes. They pinned photographs and maps to a large board in the task force room, tracing the night of December the 20th, 2013. Emily's last and confirmed text, "I'm home," went out at 8:45 p.m. Her father returned at 9:30 p.m. to find her gone. That left a chillingly narrow 45-minute window for the abduction. Within that span, someone had entered her home, subdued her without a struggle, and transported her into the freezing night. The logistics were staggering. The burial site was nearly 150 miles away, a 3-hour drive in treacherous winter conditions. Whoever took Emily had a vehicle prepared, likely a pickup truck or SUV with high clearance. The conclusion was clear. This was not an impulsive crime. It was calculated. The killer had studied her schedule, waited for the moment, and acted with precision. When detectives revisited old interviews, troubling testimony resurfaced. Neighbors recalled hearing an engine rumble just after 9:00 p.m. that night. One woman said she saw the familiar outline of Robert Kane's old blue pickup truck leaving his driveway, not returning for days. Another neighbor remembered Robert shoveling snow obsessively in his backyard, as if erasing traces. In 2014, these stories had been noted but dismissed. Now, paired with Emily's remains and new forensic tools, they carried much heavier weight. The breakthrough came when Robert's ex-wife, Angela Hicks, agreed to testify. Years earlier, she had left him, describing him as cold, secretive, and manipulative. Under questioning, Angela revealed a haunting memory. The night Emily vanished, Robert came home with blood on his coat. Days later, she watched him douse his truck with gasoline and set it ablaze, claiming it was beyond repair. At the time, she was too afraid to go to police. But in 2022, she finally spoke. Armed with Angela's account, witness statements, and forensic evidence, Anchorage police secured a warrant. In October 2022, SWAT units raided Robert's weathered wooden home. Inside, they found what prosecutors would later call a killer's shrine. In the basement, a rusted handgun with its serial number filed off was discovered in a chest. Ballistics confirmed its caliber matched the bullet lodged in Emily's skull. On Robert's desk lay a large Alaska map, red dots marking locations across the state, including the precise site near Fairbanks where Emily's body was buried. And in a cardboard box sat an obsessive scrapbook. Newspaper clippings of Emily's disappearance, her face circled in red ink, headlines underlined with grim precision. The evidence grew impossible to ignore. Then came Robert's own words. In a televised interview meant to declare his innocence, he calmly said, "I only learned about this murder after the news broke." But the word murder had not yet been publicly used by police. Investigators exchanged looks. Only someone directly connected to the crime could have known that detail before it was official. Piece by piece, the puzzle formed into a devastating picture. Robert Caney was no longer just a neighbor at vigils, or a name in a file. He was the man who had stalked Emily, abducted her, shot her, and buried her far from home. As prosecutors prepared their case, the lead investigator summed it up for the task force. This wasn't just any case. This was proof that cold case files can come alive with time. Eights, for the Hartman family, it was both vindication and heartbreak. They had carried Emily's memory through a decade of silence, demanding answers when none came. Now, as Robert Kane stood exposed, they knew their fight had not been in vain. In 2023, nearly 10 years after Emily Hartman vanished on a snowy December night, justice finally entered the courtroom. The trial of Robert Kane drew statewide attention. Prosecutors laid out the evidence piece by piece. The ballistic match linking his hidden handgun to the bullet in Emily's skull, the map marked with a red dot over Fairbanks, the burned-out truck, and the scrapbook of obsessive clippings. Witness after witness testified, including Angela Hicks, whose haunting account of blood on Robert's coat seared the jury's memory. After weeks of testimony, the verdict came down. Guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping. Robert Caney was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the first time in nearly a decade, the Hartman family felt the weight of uncertainty lift. Emily's mother whispered through tears, "Justice came late, but it came." Eights. The courtroom fell silent as the sentence was read, but the silence carried something new, not despair, but relief. Emily's name had been honored, her story finally told in full. And for you, watching from the jury box of imagination, the question lingers. If you were on that jury, could you ignore the coat, the gun, the map, and the lies? The Hartman family's fight proved that no mystery stays buried forever. Technology, persistence, and love brought answers out of the snow. If you believe cold case files deserve a voice, subscribe and join us. Justice delayed is not justice denied.